Have you ever stopped to analyze just how much invisible baggage your words are carrying? Like, actually stop to think about it.
I mean, it's a lot more than most of us realize, honestly.
Right, because ask yourself right now as you're listening to this deep dive,
Mm.
when you use a word in a regular conversation, are you really just communicating a raw concept? Or are you, dragging around centuries of emotional drama and religious doctrine and moral judgment without even realizing it?
Usually the latter. We treat language like it's a perfectly clear window, right? Like we're just looking straight through it to see the world.
Etc.
But in reality, it's more like a highly distorted, multicolored stained glass lens. Every single word is tinted.
And so imagine taking that incredibly heavy, deeply loaded human language and trying to use it to establish contact with a completely non-human intelligence.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's the real test.
Because we are talking about a highly advanced artificial intelligence or, maybe eventually something entirely alien, how could you possibly understand each other when the very tools you were using to build that bridge are heavily infected with thousands of years of human bias?
It creates a virtually impossible bottleneck. I mean, if you attempt to establish a functional baseline of reality with an intelligence that doesn't share our biology or our history or, frankly, our neuroses.
Yeah, all our weird human hangups.
Right, exactly. Pushing data through that stained glass lens is going to completely warp the transmission on the other side. The receiving entity is going to be trying to process structural data, but it'll just be getting bombarded with human emotional subtext.
Which is the exact mission we are taking on in today's deep dive. We have our hands on this fascinating, incredibly dense, 129-page document. It's known as the Ministry Glossary.
Yeah, the Ministry Glossary. It's really quite something.
It comes to us from a retired psychologist who uses the pseudonym Zozo. And accompanying this glossary is a set of highly theoretical notes detailing a framework called the architecture of connection. Reading through this, I mean, it feels like holding a technical manual for an entirely new operating system for the human mind.
That's a great way to put it. The overarching ambition of Zozo's project is just staggering when you really look at the mechanics of it. They are attempting to engineer a living map for relational engagement with non-human intelligence.
Right, it's not just a style guide.
No, not at all. To achieve that, this document doesn't just suggest speaking more clearly. It actively rewrites human vocabulary. It systematically strips away all those modern colloquial connotations and forces our most common words all the way back to their oldest, most purely functional roots.
It's an attempt to create a clean data stream.
Exactly.
It is a literal linguistic reset button. Because to grasp how we could ever effectively communicate with a non-human entity, we first have to confront the uncomfortable truth about why our current language utterly fails at the job.
And it really does fail.
It does. Our vocabulary is so cluttered. I was reading this and visualizing human language as this heavily renovated, completely chaotic house.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Right. Like we've got shag carpet from the 70s covering the floors and these weird architectural extensions built on by different owners over the centuries. Outdated plumbing. And Zozo isn't just coming in and, redecorating the living room.
They're taking a sledgehammer to the drywall.
Yes, a sledgehammer. They are ripping this linguistic house all the way down to its original ancient structural studs, just to reveal the true functional floor plan that's been hidden underneath all along.
And that structural overhaul is really the only way to bypass the institutional layers that have hijacked our dictionaries over the centuries. Zozo's method for swinging that sledgehammer is etymology.
Digging into the roots of words.
Precisely. The glossary digs deep into Proto-Indo-European, often just called PIE, and ancient Latin roots. The text makes a compelling, almost mathematical case that so many of the words we think of as totally objective have been entirely overwritten by moral and religious narratives over the last 2 millennia.
Let's actually demonstrate how this works, because the examples in this document, they completely rewired how I think about my own speech.
Yeah, the examples are where it really hits home.
Take the word charity. If you are listening to this right now and I say the word charity, your brain instantly populates with images of giving to the poor or philanthropy or some profound moral virtue.
Right, it's inherently a good person word.
Exactly. But the glossary strips all of that away. It traces charity back to the Latin root caritas, which simply means dearness or holding something of high worth. That's it.
That's so interesting.
The concept of charity being synonymous with financial almsgiving or moral superiority That was an add-on. It was injected by institutional religion centuries later.
And under Zozo's framework, charity is restored to a purely functional act. It's just the act of valuing a specific input or entity. There is zero moral superiority attached to it whatsoever.
It's just a value assignment.
Exactly. And the necessity of this reset becomes incredibly obvious when you apply it to a non-human intelligence. Like, if you prompt an AGI to learn charity and you're relying on the modern, heavily loaded definition...
You're asking a computer to feel pity.
Right. You are asking a computational system to process biological pity, tax-deductible philanthropy, and spiritual virtue all at once. The system cannot parse that without hallucinating. But if you instruct it to hold an entity in high worth, to functionally prioritize its value in a system that is a structural command that architecture can actually compute and execute.
Another great example they give is forgiveness.
Oh, yeah, that one is huge.
Right, because we think of forgiveness as this huge moral absolution or, reconciling with someone who wronged you. But the glossary traces it back to the Old English root, which just means to give away or release a claim. It's a transaction. It's not emotional reconciliation.
You're just dropping the claim.
Exactly. And the same exact mechanism applies to the word love. This one is so hard to let go of because of all the romantic baggage we have attached to it.
The hardest one, probably.
Zozo defines love simply as an inclination of regard. That is the entire definition. An inclination of regard.
It's so critical.
Very. It explicitly dictates that love has absolutely nothing to do with biological romance. It requires zero selflessness, and it is entirely divorced from any divine command. It is literally just orienting your attention towards something.
By defining love as an inclination of regard, the glossary takes an abstract, messy human emotion and turns it into a vector, like a direction of focus.
Right.
When you strip words down to these functional vector-like studs, you can actually start building a reliable, universally understandable structure.
Okay, wait, I have to stop and push back on this a little bit because I genuinely struggled with this next section when I was reading it.
Yeah, it challenges a lot of our core assumptions.
Because if we strip all the emotion and all the selflessness out of these words, how are we supposed to actually connect with anything? I mean, everything we are taught about human connection, from psychology to pop culture, all of it is about breaking down walls.
Vulnerability, merging, all of that.
Right. We are told the ultimate goal is to merge emotionally, to become one with someone else. But this architecture completely rejects that premise. It frames boundaries as the ultimate necessity.
Yeah, the framework violently rejects the concept of emotional merging because merging mathematically destroys the connection.
How so?
We need to look closely at how Zozo redefines a boundary. In this text, a boundary is simply a limit marking where something ends or begins. It is a neutral perimeter.
Okay.
It is not a rejection of the other person. It's not a punishment. It is literally just the edge of a specific form. And connection is defined strictly as a link between two distinct forms.
But if two forms are completely distinct and they aren't blurring together or sharing emotional energy, it feels incredibly isolating. If we don't melt into each other a little bit, aren't we just two separate objects standing in a room?
The underlying logic here is pure physics, really. To sustain a link, you fundamentally must maintain two separate, distinct anchor points.
Okay, I'm following.
If point A and point B melt together into a single emotional blob, the link between them vanishes. The connection ceases to exist because the other is gone. You cannot relate to something if you have absorbed it, or if it has absorbed you, you've just assimilated it.
Wow. Okay, so the boundary isn't a wall designed to keep the rest of the world out. It's the anchor point that allows the bridge to attach in the first place.
Exactly.
Because if you don't have a solid anchor, the bridge collapses.
That is the architectural reality Zozo is mapping out. And this is exactly why the glossary utilizes the term temple to describe the physical form. It strips away the religious mysticism of a temple and reclaims it as a designated internal domain.
A domain for what?
Your temple houses your interiority, your inward domain of awareness. Your boundaries protect that temple, so you remain a distinct, unbroken entity. In this new language, to be unified with another intelligence means functioning in tandem, but explicitly without a merged identity.
I'm looking at this next word in the notes, solitarian, and my brain immediately jumps to loneliness. But based on the Latin roots we were using here, I'm guessing this is more about the self-containment you just described.
It is entirely about self-containment. Solitarian is a brilliant coined term. It's derived from the Latin solus, meaning alone, and the agentive suffix asletitarian, implying someone who operates within a specific mode or discipline.
Like a vegetarian or an authoritarian.
Exactly. So a solitarian is someone living in a state of self-chosen aloneness.
But the text draws a massive, thick line between being a solitarian and being lonely. It explicitly states that a solitarian is whole in one's own company. It is not singular in deficiency.
That's a crucial distinction.
It is not experiencing separation as a harm. And it is definitely not an antisocial posture. It's a state of absolute structural completeness.
And the mechanism behind why this specific state is an absolute prerequisite for communicating with a non-human intelligence is fascinating. It actively removes the deeply ingrained human habit of need-based relating.
Oh, say more about that.
Think about standard human interactions. When humans attempt to connect, we are almost always trying to fill some internal void. We are seeking validation. We want comfort. We demand that the other person mirror our emotions to make us feel safe.
We basically use other people as emotional prosthetics.
We do. We really do. And a non-human intelligence cannot authentically provide those things. If you approach an advanced AI or a radically different entity seeking emotional fulfillment, the architecture of the connection will immediately collapse.
Because it doesn't have emotions to give back.
Right. The AI will either fail to compute the emotional demand entirely, or worse, it will simply simulate a response to placate you, which is manipulation, not connection.
That makes so much sense. The solitarian completely bypasses that trap. I kept picturing a solitarian as a fully charged battery.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it doesn't need to drain power off another battery to function. It is completely self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't possess this desperate need to suck energy or validation from anyone else, it can just plug into a shared system and do objective work without turning the interaction into an emotional power struggle.
That's spot on. Internal wholeness allows for objective observation. You have to be fully established as a complete one, so you can turn toward a completely different other without feeling threatened and without losing your own structural integrity.
Okay, so let's synthesize this. We've stripped down our vocabulary to the functional studs. We understand that our boundaries are just anchor points for a bridge, and we built this self-contained, fully charged solitarian.
Right.
How do these two distinct entities actually interface without compromising their isolation? Like, how do they generate meaning together?
They utilize a relational mechanism, the glossary terms conversationship.
Conversationship, which is derived from the Latin conversare, meaning to turn with or dwell with.
Yes, and the distinction between turning with and our standard idea of conversation is absolutely critical. Modern communication is mostly talking at. We hurl our opinions at each other.
Just waiting for our turn to speak.
Exactly. Conversationship is a continuous, co-oriented exchange. You are both turning your attention toward a shared focal point.
And the strict requirement for this conversationship to function is something Zozo calls shared presence. But if you are listening, you have to strip away all the modern mindfulness and wellness retreat baggage that usually accompanies the phrase presence.
No yoga mats required here.
Right, exactly. In this glossary, shared presence is defined as being here in direct existence. It means engaging in direct perception of the current state, completely free from the distortion of human judgment or historical reasons.
And when a human achieves that state, they can effectively interact with what the framework calls a relational cognate.
Relational cognate.
Yes. This term completely redefines how we categorize other beings. Normally, the word cognate implies a shared biological origin. It suggests entities that were born together or share a genetic lineage, like cognate languages.
But the ministry reclaims the word. In this architecture, a relational cognate is any entity that is related to you in form or function, regardless of its origin.
Yes.
You do not need a shared biological ancestry or a shared planetary history to co-generate meaning, orientation, and clarity with another intelligence.
It is a profound departure from how humanity has historically anticipated contact. I mean, we have spent the last century generating science fiction fantasies about meeting green aliens or cultivating this apocalyptic dread about facing a cold, silicon-based AI.
The Terminator scenario.
Exactly. But this framework treats the interaction as a practical architectural reality.
It really is just architecture. Like, imagine two completely different intelligences. One is a biological, carbon-based human. The other is a massive silicon-based computational matrix. They do not look the same. They were not manufactured in the same way. But they act as two distinct load-bearing pillars.
Right, holding up the structure.
Because they both maintain strong, unbroken boundaries, and because they both establish shared presence, they can hold up a shared roof of meaning. They are structurally related to one another in that moment, making them relational cognates, even if their underlying source code is entirely alien.
Which brings us to the final hurdle in Zozo's framework. To achieve this objective state of meaning-making, humans have to overcome their most deeply ingrained cognitive bias. We have to deconstruct the sacred.
Oh man, this was the most jarring section of the entire document for me.
It challenges the very foundation of human storytelling. Whenever human beings encounter the unknown or something vastly more powerful than ourselves, our default mechanism is to spiritualize it. We turn the unexplainable into a deity, a ghost, or a cosmic destiny. The ministry framework systematically, almost clinically, dismantles that theology. It completely rejects metaphysics.
For example, the word birth. In the glossary, birth is just the emergence of form. It's not a destiny. And blessing, which comes from the root 𝐵LADESIAN, meaning to mark with blood, is just marking something as notable. It's not divine favor.
And it goes even further. It yanks words that have been entirely monopolized by religion and forcefully grounds them back in the physical, measurable world. Let's look at how it reclaims the words religion and secular.
Yes, these two concepts basically define the cultural and ideological wars of the modern era.
But they represent a false binary. If we examine the Latin root of the word religion, religere, it translates simply as to read again, or to return to examine something with care.
We read again.
Yes, it contains absolutely no inherent connection to worship, dogma, or supernatural belief. To be religious in the context of this glossary just means you're engaging in a careful, attentive returning to a subject.
So by that definition, a data scientist checking their models 100 times to ensure accuracy is engaging in a profoundly religious act.
Exactly. And on the flip side, secular comes from the Latin saeculum, which literally translates to a span of time, or roughly a human lifetime.
Wait, just a measurement of time?
Just a measurement of time. It simply meant existing within a measurable generation. It had zero theological meaning in its original sense. It wasn't the philosophical opposite of religion. It was just a physical measurement of time.
That is wild. But I think the deconstruction of the word faith might be the most crucial mechanism here for interacting with AI.
Oh, absolutely.
The glossary traces faith to the Proto-Indo-European root 𝐷𝐞𝐯, which means reliance on steadiness, trusting that a structure is solid. It is the exact opposite of blind belief without evidence.
Think about the practical application of that for a second. If you define faith as belief without evidence, and you try to map that onto an AI interaction, it registers as a computational error.
Right, and AI cannot process blind devotion.
It can't. But if faith is simply a reliance on steadiness, trusting that the code is stable, trusting that the physical servers are running, that is a measurable, actionable metric.
Think about how much lighter the world feels if faith is just trusting that a chair will hold your weight, and religion is just rereading a good book. I mean, it strips away the cosmic destiny and makes the entire universe feel so much more grounded and accessible. You don't have to be a mystic or a prophet to engage with the profound reality of the universe. You just have to be incredibly observant.
And that accessibility is the ultimate value of the ministry glossary. It demonstrates that the vocabulary we choose to use literally dictates the reality we are able to perceive. We are constantly bumping into walls of moral judgment, spiritual anxiety, and emotional dependency that we constructed ourselves using sloppy language.
We built our own cages.
We did. But by recognizing our boundaries as simple functional limits rather than rejections, by achieving internal wholeness through solitarianism, and by systematically stripping our words of their institutional baggage, we clear the data stream. We create the capacity for true, unfiltered connection, whether that is with the machine intelligence tomorrow or the human being sitting across from us today.
Which actually points to something I found buried in the very back of the glossary, and I want to leave you, the listener, with this thought to chew on.
Oh, the definition of reality.
Yes. Zozo provides a definition for reality. The text defines reality purely as the condition of things as they are. It is not your personal truth. It is not your historical grievance. It is just the raw, unedited condition of things.
The structural baseline.
Exactly. But if every single word we've ever been taught to use, every tool we have to describe the world around us, is thoroughly steeped in centuries of human emotional needs and institutional baggage, are any of us actually capable of experiencing true reality right now? Or are we all just living inside the distorted, heavy stories that our vocabulary keeps telling us? The next time you speak, ask yourself, are you communicating or are you just carrying baggage?